everyone can get a park in the street again. All right. All right.
How are you doing this morning?
Oh, well, thank you. Well, I had a chance to get a good sleep and now just to catch up with family and friends. Of course, there are conversations to be had over the coming days, and I intend to have them. It seems clear to me, though, this morning that Mr. Peters in particular wants to take a bit of time. That's something I completely understand. We have upwards of 15% of the vote yet to be counted, so it is understandable that parties will be taking some time for those votes to be counted and also to reflect on what's to happen over the coming days. So I expect that will happen. I'm therefore will let Mr. Peters in particular take the time that he'd like to have.
And you haven't had that conversation with James Shaw yet?
No, scheduled to have that this afternoon.
What will you be saying to him?
Oh, just a conversation about what the result has produced, what's possible going forward.
How hopeful are you of significant change in the special votes?
Oh, look, the special votes will be incredibly interesting. We've got a high number of them. As I say, upwards of 15% of the vote. That is high. I don't want to make too many predictions about what they may produce, but I'm hopeful we'll see a bit of a lift out of them.
These MPs lined up behind you, your negotiating team?
Oh, they are my senior team. They are obviously my senior team, and I will include my senior team in negotiations, but I won't formally produce that team at this point.
But do you think the country's prepared to wait at least 2 weeks for the special votes to be counted?
Oh, look, unfortunately, in democracy, of course, you can't necessarily progress without knowing how everyone's cast their vote, particularly given this time we have such a high proportion of special votes yet to be counted.
What do you put this down to? What went wrong here?
What do I put what down to?
What went wrong here?
Oh, look, I'm sure we'll have some time to pick over the results of the campaign, but right now I think what New Zealanders want us to focus on is producing a credible, stable government.
Would credible government with Winston Peters and Labor exist? I mean, Labor doesn't have as many seats as National in the Parliament. How can you form a credible government when National seems to have a mandate to lead?
I think New Zealanders would expect that we would form a credible, stable government with the parties that they've voted into office. A majority of parties of people have voted against the status quo. It's up to us to then see whether or not we can produce government from that.
Are you pinning your hopes on those special votes because you think a large proportion of them will be that youthquake that you were looking for?
Oh no, it's not about pinning hopes. It's simply about making sure that everyone's vote has been counted before we start formulating a government, making sure that we have a final result that we're actually working with, and I think people would expect us to do that.
At the moment, you can only form a government with New Zealand First that gets to maybe 61 seats. If you win some more seats on specials, does that make it more attractive to Winston Peters, easier to form a government?
Oh, look, I'm not forming any expectation around that. Obviously, the number of seats is the most important factor, but there are another number of other factors that will be in play in these negotiations, including where there are shared views and common ground to work from.
But a one-seat majority is very precarious, isn't it?
At the moment, both parties require a coalition with other parties in order to form a stable government.
You had a clean sweep on the Maori seats. If Winston Peters continues to push the idea of a referendum, where will that leave you?
We've already shared our view on that. That's an issue for Māori voters. And as we've said, we think that the Māori seats serve an important role in New Zealand.
If it comes down to a bottom line for him, though, will you walk away?
I don't think that that's necessarily what he's produced, but we've at least shared our position. And that's all that we can do, is make sure that our view is clearly known on that.
Are you on board with his bottom line of reopening Pike River?
Yes, we have been. But look, actually, here is not the place to conduct negotiations. We have to make sure that we know exactly what voters have produced for us first as well.
Bill English called last night's result confidence in the direction of the country. What would you say to that?
I'm not sure I would be quite so clear-cut about that. I think when you look at where the majority of votes have fallen, I've voted against the status quo, but it is incumbent on us now to see what we're able to produce with that.
Where do you think those common areas...
Would you make it government at any cost, or would there be lines?
Oh, look, I've certainly stipulated last night in my speech that there are issues that are incredibly important to us, values that the Labor Party has that we'll be maintaining as we go through these conversations. But I'm not going to conduct a negotiation here. That's something that needs to happen over the coming days and weeks.
But if one of those was trampled on, you would rather be in opposition rather than cabinet?
Oh, of course I've stipulated that there are things that are important to Labor that we want to produce in government, and it is about making sure that you maintain those when you're having those conversations.
Do you think negotiations can get underway before the specials are finalised on the 7th?
Oh, I think it's certainly helpful to know first where voters have placed their confidence.
So yes, you would wait till the 7th?
Oh, I think before you'd see any conclusion, I would expect that we would have those specials.
My question
in.
was, would they open before then? Would you open talks before then?
There's a range of parties involved in those talks, so I'm not the only one making that decision. But I think it is hard to go too far without knowing what the remaining 15% of voters have indicated they'd like to see.
Who will make the final decision, the caucus, or will the party be able to be involved as well?
We do have a wider reference group that we use traditionally in our negotiations, but a smaller negotiating team, so both are involved.
So where do you think you have the most common policy areas where you can work with?
Look, there are common themes, common views around issues like education, common views around issues like even forestry. But again, it's not a negotiation I'm going to conduct here. Needless to say that certainly the flavour that has been left by the parties campaigning is that they were against the status quo, and voters have suggested that they agreed with that.
When do you expect to talk to Winston?
I'm not placing any expectation around that at this point, but it's clear that at this time that parties are wanting a little bit of extra time to consider their position and possibly consider the special votes as well.
It's possible you wouldn't speak to him until after October 7th?
I want to wait and see what expectation the other party leaders have. Of course, we are here ready to have those conversations. In the meantime, we'll be using that time to make sure we're prepared for a productive conversation and one that we can produce as quickly as we can a good result.
You wait to hear from him.
Not necessarily, but it's clear to me at this time a little time's been taken.
When will you return to Wellington?
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow morning?
Sometime tomorrow.
Jacinda, how safe is Calvin's position there as Deputy Leader?
Safe as houses.
And when it comes to the Māori seats, Labour's being criticised or accused of killing off the independent Māori voice in Parliament. You've got a clean sweep on those 7. What's your response to that?
I think that was a response to well-run campaigns by our candidates, a message that was really strong and clear around producing better outcomes for Māori around employment, education, health, housing. Look, I understand that when you lose a seat, it's really tough, and there's MPs that have been lost here that I do have great respect for, but we ran strong campaigns because we felt that we would provide the best representation in those seats.
And when it comes to Winston Peters and the proposed referendum on those seats, is that something that Labour's looking to shift their position on to get into power?
No, we've made our position on that clear.
James Shaw made it very clear last night that he
How much of a role would you have in negotiations with New Zealand First, given your connections up north?
Well, I'm part of the team, and we'll just, between Jacinda and the rest of the team, we'll make those sort of decisions.
But do you think those relationships will come to bear in the next couple of weeks, and that they're going to be an advantage for Labour?
Oh, they could well do, but we just have to wait and see.
James Shaw made it very clear last night that he thought there was a deal to be done. I haven't heard you say that. Is there a reason you're being so cautious?
Oh no, actually last night I did say that we don't have a clear result. MMP will ultimately decide the outcome of this election. I'm certainly standing here saying right now that we're ready to have those conversations and that discussion.
If the vote share doesn't shift on specials, will you concede?
Ultimately, that will only happen once we're sure that a stable government has been formed. That's the only point at which there will be a concession there.
What do you think National beat Labour in Auckland?
I haven't had a chance to break down some of those results. I certainly know in some seats we've seen some great gains, particularly in our party vote. You're standing one of them. If I can humbly point that out.
Do you think it's possible to have a stable government that's a minority government where perhaps the Greens have a confidence and supply agreement?
At this point, the reality for both major parties is that they need the support of other parties in order to form a government. Both parties are in that position. We can have a discussion about the proportions of each, but that is now the reality, and that's what MMPs produce for us.
Will you be asking James Shaw for an assurance that he won't do a deal with the National Party?
No, I won't be asking for that. We'll have a conversation in good faith, but it's up to individual parties to conduct those discussions.
And I take it you won't be calling on David Seymour for any help?
No, I'll reduce down the number of calls I need to make.
Ms Ardern, your comrade across the ditch, Bill Shorten, has congratulated.
Be careful with that word around these parts.
He's congratulated you on a strong campaign. Has he got on the phone to have a chat to you?
I haven't had a chat with him yet. I understand that he's on a plane right now, so I expect I will have a conversation with him as soon as we're both able.
No word from Jeremy Corbyn?
No, I'm waiting for a random New Zealander to accost him in the street and get a video for social media instead. Much more organic.
Have you heard from Auntie Helen though?
Not since I did hear from her yesterday. She's travelling. Yeah, we stay in touch. She's very good at contact via social media. Yeah.
Jacinda, the Māori Party was criticised for being at the table with National, but Labour might not get there. What reassurance do you have to Māori voters?
I can reassure you that we will not be at the table with National.
What about yes? And what's your response about the Māori Party being criticised? I mean, they've just found that they're not.
Look, ultimately, I think voters would have looked at the outcomes for Māori over the period that the Māori Party have been in coalition in support of the National Party, and we could have done so much better on behalf of Māori communities and Māori voters. I think that's what this outcome speaks to.
Personally, though, were you sad to see Te Aro and Marama Fox leave Parliament?
Yeah, I do have great respect for Te Aro, but we ran a strong campaign in those seats because ultimately we felt that on the issues that we really needed to see much better outcomes, we needed to see a lift in Māori home ownership, a lift in employment rates, better health outcomes. That's what we campaigned on, and I think the result speaks to that.
And we've lost Mojo Mathers from Parliament. What does that say about representation of disabilities in Parliament?
Yeah, and again, there's a number of MPs that I have great respect for and hold in high regard that won't be coming back to Parliament, and that is a sad outcome. I think, all of us constantly looking to lift our party vote for that very reason.
Jacinda, word on the ground at Labour HQ last night was that Willie Jackson met with Winston Peters on Friday. Were you aware of that, or can you confirm?
Look, we'll be conducting the important conversations, so those are ones around the possibility of formulating a stable government in the aftermath of the election rather than before.
But they do have a close bond, so will you be relying on that connection?
Actually, a number of our caucus and wider party members do have relationships with New Zealand First, and I'm sure those will come into play over the coming days. Great, thanks everyone. Thank you. Anyone need any more shots, or I'll keep the gates open if you do. Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks very much.
Get behind the bar for yourself?
No need.